Star Wars, the expanded universe. A universe so vast that has over 17,000 characters from various different eras, from Dawn of the Jedi to the Old Republic, to the prequels all the way to the Legacy era. This is the tale of over 17,000 characters throughout the Star Wars universe. This is our first step to a much larger world that exists in the Star Wars universe. This is the story beyond the movies. This is the story of the Star Wars expanded universe. A universe loved by many. A universe that helped shape what this franchise is today. This is their story.
Hello everyone, Darcenova here. This time, for the first time in this series, I'm reviewing a comic book in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. And this is the Dark Empire Trilogy, the first part of it anyway. I'll talk about part 2 of the trilogy and Empire's End in a different video, because honestly, I don't want to talk about the entire trilogy in one video, because I want to focus on this. Because I feel like both of them deserve their own videos, and, well, I have a lot of things to say about both. Dark Empire, the first one, Tim Vitch and Clem Kennedy, Tim Vitch being the writer and Tim Kennedy being the artist, I felt did a good job of bringing something new to the Star Wars universe. And this edition that I have of this is a first edition of Dark Empire. Dark Empire was a story that was conceived the year I was born, 1988. And this was one of the first proposals for the sequel to Return of the Jedi. Will be the first story that take place after it. But Timothy Zahn rejected writing this, so he wrote the Thrawn Trilogy. So this takes place right after the Thrawn Trilogy, about a year, I believe. And this, which is why you can notice a few minor contradictions, how it doesn't reference Thrawn, it doesn't reference the stuff that previously happened. So some inconsistencies do exist in this, comic. But they're minor, they're not big. Though there is some things I can nitpick about, but we'll talk about that later. How is the story? Because this is pretty controversial, even amongst EU fans, Dark Empire. Because, there's people that say that this ruined the ending for Return of the Jedi. This shits on Anakin's sacrifice. And the thing I have to ask, how? In my opinion, I felt like this showcased the big difference between Luke and Anakin in terms of their characters. Because when Luke gives into the dark side, when he submits to the Emperor, he's not doing it for reasons like Anakin is. Anakin's doing it for more selfish reasons. He does it to save his wife Padme, while Luke is doing it to learn about the dark side and to help the rebellion. Because had Luke not done that, I don't believe they would have won the war. And Luke doing that, I felt, was for the greater good. Luke did have good intentions, unlike Anakin had good intentions too, but I felt like Luke of the individuals had more support from his family. Because Anakin had no family outside the Jedi. I mean, yes, he had Obi-Wan. Yes, he had Ahsoka, if you consider her canon. Yes, he had Padme. But Anakin did not have the support that Luke had. At this point in the timeline, Luke is not married to Mara Jade. Luke has his brother-in-law Han, who is one of his best friend. Leia, who only 6 years earlier learned that she was his sister. So, Luke has family that are close to him, unlike Anakin does. And I feel like this is what showcases the big difference between the characters and how he was able to be saved from the dark side. Yes, Anakin was eventually saved, but that was long after he committed all those terrible atrocities as Darth Vader. Luke Skywalker, he didn't do it, to be for selfish gain like Anakin did. Luke was far different in his motivations, and I don't believe this ruined Luke's character at all. Honestly, it gave Luke a more of an understanding of the Force. I feel like this, made Luke see both sides, and I believe Luke became wiser for it because of the events that he went through in Dark Empire. And he realized just how terrible the dark side truly is. And because, Luke had to learn most of the stuff about the Force, lightsaber forms, his knowledge of the Force was mostly self-taught. What little he couldn't, do on his own, he learned from holocrons that he found. And I just didn't think it was as bad as a lot of people say it is, the story. I felt it was really good. At least the first one. But we're talking about Dark Empire 2 and Empire's End in a separate video. And because no matter how much you don't like this trilogy, I don't care if Timothy Zahn did some retcons. In my opinion, this happened. You cannot reject this. If you accept the original expanded universe as the canonicity of Star Wars, you cannot just say this doesn't exist. I'm sorry. Because it's mentioned in New Jedi Order, it's mentioned in the Jedi Academy trilogy, it's mentioned in Vision of the Future. The events of this trilogy is mentioned a lot throughout the expanded universe. So this is very much something you can't wipe from canon. You can have your own personal canon, but just because you don't like certain aspects doesn't mean you can say this didn't happen. I know some of you may think it's cheap because I don't consider TCW part of the official narrative of Star Wars, but I'll get to that in a later video why I reject it. Now let's talk about the art, because comic books, I like to talk about the art. How does the art hold up after, over 20 years? In my opinion, my friends, the art, I think, is beautiful. Back in an era where, we had artists, do their own thing regarding the Star Wars universe. I mean, this looks really good. I know it may turn some people off. It did to me at first. But it's just the artwork. It's just amazing. Honestly. It's a different style than what you normally get in the Star Wars universe. It's kind of a shame that there aren't that many comics with, the big three in post-Jedi. And here's another pick, too. It's just, I really enjoyed Dark Empire, at least the first one. I do think it was a good story. The art was good, and I thought that the story was good too. I mean, Dark Empire, I wouldn't put it up there as one of the greatest comics in the expanded universe, but in my opinion, I consider this underrated because I don't believe it deserves all the shit that it gets. Dark Empire 1. A lot of people will disagree with me on this, but Dark Empire 1, I thought was a good story. I felt like it developed the character of Luke further. It gave him a bigger understanding of the Force, and it showcased just how dangerous Darth Sidious is. If this was the only story in the Dark Empire series, if this was it, this would have been good. This is the only one that should have existed. But unfortunately, like all things, greed gets in the way of everything. And they had to turn what was a good story the first time around into complete shit. Next time, my friends, we're going to talk about Dark Empire 2 and Empire's End and how I felt it was the most unnecessary sequel that I've read in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. It should have stayed into one series, not two or three. If you count Empire's End as its own series, which you might as well consider a duology, but still, Dark Empire should have been one. It was a good story, and it should have been only one, not two or three. Dark Empire, it isn't the best the Expanded Universe has to offer. I would recommend reading it if you want to find out what happens, to Luke in between the Thrawn trilogy and the Jedi Academy trilogy. I recommend reading it for that. And for its own unique artwork. Because the first one I thought the art was great. I would probably rank it good. It's not great. It's not classic worthy. It's not masterpiece. I'd say it's good. Because I feel like it has its place in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. And I feel like it deserves to get appreciated more. And not get the shit that it gets. Because people that have read it don't understand the context of the characters or the story in the Dark Empire miniseries. Stay tuned next time as I read the unnecessary sequel, or review, whatever, you get my drift, as I review the unnecessary sequel to Dark Empire. Later, people. Peace out.